Welcome to the Live Fit podcast with your host, Glenn Johnson. Today you will learn techniques for permanent weight loss and improved overall health.
Yes, it is time once again for the Live Fit podcast. I'm your host, Glenn Johnson, and this is episode 31. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I really, truly appreciate you being out there. It gives me a reason to speak to you and to get on my soapbox and talk to you about the things that I find really, really important in health, in making your health, your fitness, your body composition, your life better. Today's episode is the result of a few requests from some of my followers. They wanted to learn more about stretching. There's a lot of confusion about stretching, and this episode I'm going to tell you what's the difference between the different types of stretches, why you should stretch, and when you should stretch. There's 5 different stretches that I cover on this, and I'm going to let you know when to use each one of them, which is the best techniques, and of course, how and why you should do it. But first, I'd like to ask you a favor. Now, I know many of you, lots of you listening have left a rating or review on iTunes or Stitcher Radio, but I want to ask you again, if you have not, to please do so. I don't know if you know it or not, but this is the only way my show gets any kind of status, is by listeners like you posting either a rating or a review. A rating, you just click on the number of stars you think it should have, or a review, you would click stars and then say, hey, this show is blah, 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 whatever you want to say about it. And that's the only way iTunes has to rate it, because if nobody gives any feedback, it sort of disappears down and down and down the ranks below the newer podcasts that come out. Even though this may have a lot of listeners, if nobody's saying anything, then iTunes doesn't know. All they know is downloads through iTunes, and that carries some weight. It's really the engagement or the responses that I get from you guys that say something. Plus, it's also nice to hear what you think of the show, what I can do better, what I am doing well. So I know most of you are probably not in front of a computer right now. You've got me in your ears and you're driving, biking, mowing the lawn, whatever it might be. But can I ask you, please, next time you get in front of a computer, to go to livefitlean.com/iTunes, and that's going to take you right to my iTunes page. If you have an account already, you can go ahead and fill out that little rating review thing there. If not, I have a little tutorial on my website, livefitlean.com, that'll show you how to fill out the rating or review. Anyways, once again, thank you for your help. I want to get this show noticed. I want new people to hear it. I want everybody else to hear it as well. Anybody who's already heard it, I want them to hear it some more and be reminded that we're still here, we're still ticking, and we are still improving lives, helping people to live fit. Now let's get on with the show so you can hear all about stretching. Why don't people stretch? I've asked this, and they say they forget, or they don't like to, or they're not very flexible. Therefore, they don't like to because there's really not a reward from it. They stretch, and they can't stretch very far, so they don't do it again. Funny thing about stretching is, and pretty much everything, takes practice. It takes time to improve. Think about writing your name. It took a while to write your name. And when I give a fitness assessment, I measure a person's ability to bend forward and touch towards their toes, reach towards their toes while they're sitting. And some people score really well. Some are pretty good. Most actually, score pretty poorly. And when I ask these people that score poorly how often they stretch, 100% of the time, their answer is either never or almost never. Which goes to show, if you don't do it, you're not going to get any better at it. Playing piano, driving a car, putting on your clothes. If you never do it, you're not going to be very good at it. Well, why should we stretch? There's a lot of reasons why we should stretch. It helps reduce the risk of injuries. Think of it this way. What doesn't bend breaks. Think of the weeping willow tree. It's really soft and supple, and it bends all over the place. I used to have one, and I lived in a really windy area, and that thing would bend almost all the way down to the ground. But then it would spring back up after the wind let up, and it was great. Maybe it had a few broken branches, but those other trees that are really strong and rigid, they'll withstand a lot. But then once they get too much, they just snap. Now, there are some people that don't want to be more flexible, and these, I would have to say, intentionally don't stretch, or at least don't stretch certain areas of their body. And that would be more for some sort of athletics that they're doing. I was trained to become a personal trainer by a guy named Dr. Squat, Dr. Fred Hatfield. And he was an Olympic squatter. He would squat 1,100 and some odd pounds on his shoulders and go from a full down squatting position to standing. He did not want any more flexibility than he needed to do that one thing. He did not want flexible ankles. He did not want a flexible back because he's holding 1,100 pounds on his back. He did not want it to flip around. He wanted to keep it really rigid and firm. So he's an example of somebody who purposely did not want flexibility. Unfortunately, most people should have more flexibility than they do. And there's a lot of back problems. There are more people with back issues than any other issue, even more so than knees and hips. Any one issue, any one area of the body that gives a problem, it's the back. And a lot of the reason for this is inflexibility. Just not being able to bend. And then when you do go to bend, let's say you drop your wallet, you reach down really quick to pick it up. Bam, maybe you've bent a little bit lower than you're used to bending, and what doesn't bend breaks. We stretch so we can improve our range of motion, or our flexibility, the range of motion of a joint. We stretch, when we stretch, it improves our circulation, it improves our stress, it will help you sleep, it'll help you fall asleep quicker and stay asleep more soundly. It can certainly relieve back pain and prevent what may later cause back pain. So if you're young and you're really flexible, now is the time to take up stretching on a daily basis, regularly, every single day, stretch. It doesn't have to be a time-consuming thing. You could do it in about 3 minutes, I would say. It will improve your posture. It'll also improve your coordination. Your body holds the position it maintains the longest. If you've ever had a joint in a cast and then you take that cast off, that joint doesn't really want to bend. So if you're sitting at a desk chair or a car seat and you're bending forward, hunch forward, your arms forward, that's going to cause a permanent bend in your spine, and it's going to hold that position. So we need to get up and stretch and counter that movement or counter that position every so often, once an hour or so. And this leads me into when to stretch. Now, the first thing I'm going to say before I go into the different types of exercises are you always, always, always want to stretch when the body is warm. Now, if this means getting up and going for a walk and then stretching, that's good. You want to move the muscles. You want to warm up the muscles from the inside out. Don't count on hot temperature, hot climate to warm up the fascia, this covering around the outside of your muscles. Your muscles have this coating called fascia. It's kind of like the liner or the casing around a sausage or a hot dog. And the muscle needs to actually slip in there, and that fascia needs to stretch a little bit too, or else the muscles aren't going to be able to stretch. I'm going to go into more detail about stretching, when to stretch, before, during, after, at the end of this. I just wanted to open that up and say, always stretch warm. If you don't listen to any more of this podcast, if you stop right here, at least you know, always stretch warm. And the warmth must be created by your muscles, by you, by movement. Okay, there's different types of stretches. I know there's many different types you've probably heard and seen, and it can certainly be confusing. When to stretch is also confusing because we used to hear that you should stretch before, and now many of you have heard that you're not supposed to stretch before. I'm going to explain that in a little bit. I'm also going to tell you how to stretch, roughly, but I will certainly tell you the techniques and what should be going through your mind while you're stretching. I have 5 common flexibility techniques that should help eliminate some of your confusion and give you an idea of when to stretch, what type of stretch to use, and how long you should hold these stretches. The first one is going to be the most common, static stretching. This is the type of stretching that you probably think of when you hear of stretching. And that's where let's say you're sitting on the floor with straight legs, you reach forward to touch your toes, and you hold that position. Or even standing, you bend down to touch your toes, and you hold that position. Or you hold your hand onto a door jamb and you kind of turn outward. You stretch the front muscles of your chest, your pecs, your deltoids. That's another example of a static stretch. In other words, you're extending the muscle of or group of muscles through a joint's range of motion, and you're going to hold it anywhere from 20 to indefinite amount of time. But I would say at least 20, maybe 30 seconds would be the minimum. Now, here's how I picture how long to hold a stretch. I don't know anybody who's actually ever pulled taffy, but if you've ever seen taffy being pulled on one of those machines usually down at the beach where they have the saltwater taffy a lot of times, taffy is pretty tough and stretchy, but if you were to hold it and then pull it apart with your two hands, it's going to be tough to pull, but you could do it, and it'll stretch out, and then it'll be a straight line of stretched taffy, but then it's going to start sagging under its own weight. I feel that with my own muscles. I'll start a stretch and I'll hold it and it'll be really tight and tense and kind of painful, and then it releases and it gives, and that is the moment that you know you've reached your stretch. Now you can keep holding it at that time, or you can let off and then stretch again, and multiple stretches will increase your flexibility, give your muscles an opportunity to relax for a minute, and then before it's put under pressure again. Now, we can stretch with our own body weight, or we can have a person stretch us. So one is active. Now, that would be a good example of that would be me just hanging in forward fold down towards my toes, touching my hands on the ground or as close as I could get to it. That is an active stretch. I'm moving myself through it. I'm moving my body. I'm being active on my own, meaning I'm using some muscle, or at least allowing gravity to pull me down, but I'm still holding some muscles tight to keep me from falling over. Now, in contrast, a passive stretch would be me not doing a darn thing, maybe laying on a table and somebody lifting my leg and stretching me, or pulling a limb or moving some joint and stretching me without me doing anything. The benefits here is I can totally, completely relax. I can just lay there and try to fall asleep and let the person stretch me. You're probably going to want to give them some input, like a little bit more, a little bit less. Okay, that's enough. You just ripped my muscle off. Something like that. So you don't want to literally fall asleep, but you get the idea. You want to relax. Now, dynamic stretching. This is a continuous movement pattern that mimics what you are going to do. For example, a runner, before they start running, they're going to want to move their legs in a similar motion that they would running, and probably even exaggerated, move through a greater range of motion than you might for running. You could stand on a step and just swing one leg forward and back, maybe even just stand on flat ground and do it. But you want to be able to have a full range of motion, forward and back. And still, you don't want to do this when you're cold. You want to be warmed up first, but don't do static stretches first. Do this, then do your running, then you can do static stretches later. The purpose of dynamic stretching is to improve the flexibility of the given sport. And once again, you can do it with your legs, or you can do it with your arms. If you're about to play baseball or some sort of throwing game, you definitely want to use your arm in the exact same manner that you will with less intensity. So don't just grab a ball and throw it with all your might. You want to swing your arm around, do some arm circles, do some practice throws, lower speed, just to get the joints, the joint capsule, the muscles, the fascia prepared for what's coming. We introduce things slowly. Ballistic stretching. Now, normally you're not advised to bounce while stretching. This has been something we've been trying, we as in personal trainers and fitness professionals have been trying to convince our many clients, especially the older clients, not to bounce when you stretch. But I'm going to tell you that there are some exceptions to this. First, let me explain that the reason we don't want to bounce is because it can damage the muscles. If the muscles get pulled or stretched too quickly or too far, we have these tiny little devices inside, the Golgi tendon organ or the muscle spindle, that help protect them. So if a muscle is being stretched really quickly, boom, we have a fire, and the muscle actually contracts to keep it from being stretched. Same thing if it's going slowly but being stretched too far, boom, we have another fire. Those muscles will fire and contract. And really negate the point of stretching because you can't stretch a muscle that's tense. The muscle has to be relaxed in order to release and give and allow it to stretch out. If you don't do that, if it's contracted, then it's a complete waste of time and it may be damaging to the muscle. But there are certain situations where you do want to use ballistic exercises. Now, we start off with warm muscles, and then we do some dynamic stretching, and then we can do some ballistic movements. Now, I would not say this is good for everybody to use, but if you're an athlete, then some ballistic stretching would be in order sometimes before, but also definitely after your exercise. So dynamic and ballistic stretching are good for preparing you for certain activities, but not for the general public. Active isolated stretching, or AIS, is held for only about 2 seconds at a time. It's performed repeatedly for several repetitions, and each time exceeds the point of resistance from the time before by a few degrees. So in other words, if you're moving your arm, stretching out your arm, we're going to hold it for 2 seconds, relax. Move it again, try to go a little bit farther, hold it for 2 seconds, relax. Move it again, try to go a little bit farther yet, relax, etc. And after a while, you'll see that the distance, the range of motion is increased. Myofascial release. This is one that I do very often. Also, I was just going to say, as far as what I do for my life, I do static stretching multiple times per day. I do dynamic stretching before I go for a run or a bike ride. I rarely use ballistic stretching techniques or active isolated stretching techniques, but I do perform myofascial release on myself and others. Probably the easiest way to explain this is, if you ever seen anybody lay on their side on top of a foam roller. It's one of those big foam things shaped kind of like a hot dog, and they roll back and forth over the side of their leg. This is stretching the IT band, the iliotibial band. And you don't have to use a foam roller. You could use something else. A rolling pin works. But what you're doing is you're pushing down into the fascia. I explained the fascia is like a casing around a sausage or a hot dog. And what you're doing is, picture a rolling pin on your thigh, just real easy example there. And as you're pushing down into the thigh and then rolling it, the fascia and the skin and everything else has to go bend around that rolling pin. And when it does that, it kind of wiggles it around and loosens up that fascia from the muscle, so it's more easily stretched and it can move. It can have a greater flexibility and release. And in fact, a lot of times you might feel tight and stiff when it's not your muscles that are being stiff. It's actually the fascia being kind of bound or stuck on the muscle. So doing something like this is very beneficial to freeing up muscles, making you feel more mobile, more easily able to move through these ranges of motion. It's great for loosening up the IT band, which often causes back pain, hip pain, knee pain, sometimes actual leg pain, because it's right there on the side of the leg. The technique you want to use is small back and forth motions. You can do a few inches at a time, 2 to 6 inches at a time, and you could go for 30 to 60 seconds. I generally go until I can't stand it anymore, because really pain tolerance is going to be your limit. Some people get on there and they can roll once and that's all they can handle, and I was like that the first time too, but you get used to it and it takes a little bit more each time to make it successful. But the pain is not as painful now that I've done it more often. That first time I had that release was pretty painful, but after that it's not so bad. Here's one of my favorites. I use this on a lot of my clients. It's called proprioceptive neuromuscular facilitation, or PNF in other words. Now, it's a really cool technique that basically uses the muscles to cause a relaxation. So let me give you the example of somebody laying on their back on a table, and I lift up their leg, trying to get as much hip flexion as I can. I'm going to raise it up towards the ceiling and then beyond, if back down towards their head if I can. Some people are flexible enough I can get their foot all the way to their head. Some people I can be lucky if I can get their leg at a 90-degree bend. Regardless of where it is, there's 3 different techniques for PNF. The first one is called hold relax. The second one, contract relax. And the third one, hold relax with agonist contraction. Okay, hold relax. What that means is I'm going to do a passive stretch for about 10 seconds or so on their leg. I'm going to push their leg up and take it through the range of motion and hold it right at the limit. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say push, and they're going to push their leg down against the resistance. I'm holding their leg. They're going to push against my hand. I'm not going to let the leg move, and they're going to push for about 6 seconds or so. Then I'm going to move down through the range of motion and then back all the way up to their limit and try to extend and increase their range of motion. I will hold that for probably 20 or 30 seconds, and we'll go through this cycle 2, 3, 4, 5 times until I really see some change. And there really is a great amount of improvement. It's amazing. You can see a couple degrees improvement with each of these hold, contraction, relax patterns. Now, the next one is called contract, relax. The first one is hold, relax. This is contract, relax. So it's the same process, except instead of holding their leg still as they push against my hand, I allow the leg to come down a little bit. So they're moving it slowly against resistance. Then I say relax, and I push the leg all the way up again against their range of motion. And each time I do this, I get a little bit more range of motion out of them. Personally, I don't see a great difference between the hold relax and the contract relax method as far as effective in this. I use them both interchangeably. I find them both to be equally as effective. Now, another one which I've seen some results in is called the hold relax with agonist contraction. So once again, we're going to picture that person laying on their back with their legs straight. I'm going to pick up a leg and push their foot up and around towards their face, or as close as I can get it. And now instead of them pushing against my hand, they're going to try to pull their leg towards their face. They're going to lift their leg towards their torso, pull towards their torso. In other words, the same direction that I'm pushing. They're going to do that for 6 to 10 seconds. I'm going to lower it, release it through the range of motion, then push it up again against their range of motion and try to increase the stretch. Now, what happens is, because they are tensing up these muscles, when the muscles relax, it's changing the set point. Instead of the muscle holding and trying to protect itself or the joint or any of the other material around that range of motion, once they know where it's contracted, it essentially changes the set point or the neutral position. Could go into it in more technical details, but I think that's enough for you to understand. Knowing the 3 different types of PNF exercises can be useful, but you do have to do it with somebody who knows what they're doing. So this is not something you can do on your own. You might be able to teach somebody how to do it, but you don't want to have anybody on there who's too strong for you and is going to damage you, because it would be easy to stretch somebody too far. But if you're gentle and careful about it, I would say go ahead, play with it, give it a try, see what you think, see if it works, because it is really quite effective, but do be careful. Okay, when to stretch. Once again, I'm going to reiterate, always be warm. ABW, always be warm from the inside out, not superficially from the environment, but from your muscles moving. The appropriate kind of stretch before an activity is dynamic. None of the others are appropriate before an activity. Static stretching can actually be counterproductive as well as damaging. Okay, it's counterproductive to your activity. Listen to this. Static stretching reduces your strength in the stretched muscle by about 5.5% when a static stretch is held for 90 seconds or more. Now, this was a research study that was performed, and they had people stretch for 90 seconds or longer, and their muscle strength was reduced by 5.5%. Static stretching reduces muscle power or the muscle's ability to produce force during contractions by about 2%. This, in turn, reduces explosive muscular performance by as much as 2.8%. So what does this say? If you do a static stretch before your activity, let's say a running sprint, you will not be as fast running as you would have had you not stretched before the activity. How much slower will you be? It may be noticeable, it may not be. It depends on what level you are racing or competing. If you're just out for fitness, then I suppose it's fine. But if you are in fierce competition, 2% could certainly matter, could certainly make a difference. Now, if you're just out for good health, I still don't recommend static stretching because you don't want to overstretch and damage a muscle. Just go ahead and move through the range of motion before you start your run. Maybe in the middle of the run, if you feel tight, go ahead and stop and do a static stretch, but don't really push it. Don't push it beyond what you really think you should. You're not trying to make any progress. You're just trying to loosen up a muscle. The time to make progress while stretching is after a workout because you're nice and warm, and you're also have these muscles that are really tight because you've been using them repeatedly, contracting. Let's say you're running. Those muscles need to be loosened up or else they're going to stay in a more contracted position. It's like they're finding a new set point or a new neutral. Let me tell you a story. I was in an exercise science class, and we were in the lab, and my lab partner was using a goniometer on different joints of my body, and she got to my elbow, and she told me to straighten my arm. I said, well, it is. She said, no, it's not. Look at it. And I looked, and it had about a 2 or 3 degree bend at it, and I could swear it was straight. I did everything I could to straighten it, and I couldn't. Back in those days, I was doing a lot of weightlifting. I had much larger muscles than I do now, and I put a lot of attention into weightlifting and training and trying to get as big and strong as I could. And I don't mean like show muscles. I just mean for myself, just to test out the different theories and techniques, and that was what I was into at the time. Well, it turns out that those bicep muscles were really short because I was doing a lot of bicep exercises, and I would stretch, but I didn't put that much time or effort into it. I didn't really notice it. It didn't cause a problem. And it didn't then, except for appearance, and I couldn't straighten my arm. Well, now I can straighten my arm because I've been spending less time doing bicep exercises. I have been stretching and paying attention to retaining my range of motion, and everything's good again. So you can regain it, but it took time. And I had to stretch on a daily and even multiple times per day basis. If you want to get better at something, you need to repeat it. You need to do it over and over again. So you can stretch during an activity, and you most certainly can stretch after an activity. Now, I said before, you can do dynamic stretches. During, you can go ahead and do dynamic, ballistic, or static. And after an activity, you can do any of the 5 stretches I previously mentioned. So when is the best time to stretch? Initially, right after an activity. You might not want to get really involved and stretch for a long period of time, but if you just came back from a run, you finished a run, you're hot, you need to move around, go ahead and do some quick little stretches. Touch your toe, twist your hips, your waist, move around, move your arms, swing your arms, bend back, bend sideways, bend forward. And then later on, take some time, take 5, 10, maybe 15 minutes and do some stretching. I choose to do this part of it, the long-term stretching or the long-duration stretching, right before bed. It's a wonderful way to kind of shed the day, to slough off the day, get that potential energy that's locked up in my muscles out of there. Sometimes you don't know that a muscle is tight or that you have energy cooped up until you release it. There have been many times I've gone to bed and I feel tired, yet my body is just sort of vibrating. It's humming. It's and so I get up and I do some push-ups and some ab exercises, and then I stretch, and then I lay down and I just melt right into my bed, and I fall asleep more quickly, and I get a much more restful, relaxed sleep. It's wonderful. So every single one of you should stretch before bedtime. It only takes 3 to 5 minutes. Make it part of your bedtime routine. Work it in there. What's the worst thing that can happen? What's the harm? It takes a little bit longer to get to bed. Believe me, it's worth it. You'll fall asleep much more quickly. You could do a forward bend and stretch the whole backside of your body. Then you could do a runner's lunge and stretch your hip flexors. Then you can do a side bend to stretch those side muscles. There you go. Hit the rack, go to bed, enjoy your sleep, and be refreshed and limber and loose the next morning. Well, that's it for the show. Thanks for listening. Please keep those reviews coming in iTunes and Stitcher Radio. You can subscribe, read the show notes, articles, and all about my weight loss programs at livefitlean.com. Once again, thanks for listening, and always remember to live fit.